We find ourselves at another discussion between some of our writers here at Fragrantica, and today we'd like to discuss benchmark, exemplary fragrances of certain specific categories. And I'd like to start that discussion with a topic about the topics. We were actually unsure of how to describe what we're talking about specifically. I think the initial idea was, how would you, if you were to take an example of a category of fragrance, like let's just say aromatic off the top of my head here, if you were to find one characteristic fragrance from that category, what would it be? Would it be a favorite of yours? Would you choose something that covers a lot of territory within that? Would it be sort of like a go-to, the first thing you think of in the aromatic category?
I think when we talk about like benchmark perfumes, the temptation is always there to choose a favorite, to choose something that, for you personally is something that you reach for all the time, and that it's the first thing that pops in your mind because you treasure it so much. And indeed, I think for me, for the 5 categories that we're going to talk about today on this installment of this Fragrantica Talk series now, I think I chose about 2 of them, of the 5 categories that are in fact my favorites, but I wanted to talk about them for reasons other than the fact that it is a favorite of mine. And then for the other 3, I chose fragrances that I thought were emblematic of their category for a specific reason, and gave me an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about what that category means too.
One of our readers / viewers / listeners called LeFranc, who suggested this topic on a previous in the comments on a previous Fragrantica talk. So thank you, LeFranc, for suggesting it, because it's a really interesting thing for us to do. I think it's interesting anyway, and I've had a lot of fun kind of thinking of these categories. I think you're right, Adam. To some degree, fragrance categorization feels slightly arbitrary at times. I think particularly when people are coming into the fragrance scene and they are starting to learn about fragrance, words like chypre and fougere can be used to beat people over the head a little bit and be like, a little bit too exclusive. It's a bit of a language barrier. Because a lot of fragrances do straddle families, characteristics, and actually a lot of really good fragrances do. So I think there's something about breaking the mold that's important, whilst at the same time it's really difficult, I think, to produce an exemplary perfume within a category and for it to be novel, because sometimes there's a lot being done, there's been a lot that's gone before. So a good rose fragrance, how do you make it a good example of a rose fragrance so that people will understand it as a rose fragrance, but at the same time make it feel fresh and new and modern and interesting and like it's going to catch people's attention? And I think that is a line that certainly the perfumes I've chosen they walk them very carefully between that novelty and saleability, understandability and innovation. And I think it's a really interesting topic. And so, yeah, thank you, LeFranc, for suggesting it, because it's really made me think.
Yeah, I mean, so often, like you said, Nicola, perfumes are associated in our minds with specific categories. We start to realize that the usefulness of categorization sometimes feels like it only extends so far. But I think it is important, no matter where along somebody is in their appreciation of perfume, if they have just gotten into it or if they've been into it for many years, I think it is important to realize that categorizing something doesn't just help us fit it into a box. It helps us to understand other things like it, other things that have done something similar or different before, and that helps us ideally to appreciate a fragrance in particular to new ends, really. So I hope that we can focus on that in today's discussion, because that's what's really interesting about this, is that Is any one particular fragrance the perfect emblematic example of a category? Probably not, just because many people have different opinions on fragrance and categorization. So it's not something to take too seriously, but it is something that can be interesting to talk about.
And I think as well, one of the things that struck me when we were doing this is we looked at the typical fragrance families, didn't we? That fragrances are broken up into normally, and kind of we're like, okay, so there's 10 that we'll work with, but usefully, I think it's, if we were to break it down into families that would be actually useful to people, we'd probably end up with more like 100, because I'd want to talk about my favorite tuberose, I'd want to talk about my favorite neroli, and so we would get really, really granular, and we'd end up having, I don't know, instead of what we aim to be 2 of these specific talks, we'd end up with probably 50 of them. And maybe people might be getting bored by that point.
Yeah, so I guess we should probably mention that we are dividing this into 2 parts, and today in the first part we're talking about 5 categories. We're talking about spicy, perfumes, woody, aromatic, citrus, and aquatic. And then in the next part we'll be talking about green, fruity, florals, leathers, and gourmands. So we try to choose perfume categories that are broad enough to avoid, like you said in your example there, like your favorite tuberose. We made a very hard decision just to say floral, right? And I know that there's so many different directions that floral perfumes can go in, but I do think it is worth exploring it from a top-down perspective of, like, we're looking at all the florals that each of us are familiar with. Which one do you think really kind of settles into that one genre? So that's why we made these decisions. Those are the categories that we'll be talking about. With that, would either one of you like to start us off with our first category of the day of spicy fragrance?
I'd be willing to do so. And actually, this is good. This is good kind of segue to start into to talk a little bit about my choice, because I chose something which is it's interestingly new, and how can I say, it's something I've known about for some time since it came out, but it's also newer to me because it hasn't been like a best friend that I wear all the time. I had samples of this that I've worn, but because I happen to really like spicy fragrances and I have a number of them, I thought, gosh, this is going to be a tough call because I could choose from many. But I chose something that I haven't talked about a lot, but I've been very familiar with, and that's a perfume called Tango by Masque Milano. And this is made by Cecile Ziorkian, and it's a really wonderful fragrance. What I think I like so much about it in terms of being spicy is that you could also say it's very much like a sort of amber profile. Really, really beautiful fragrance with a good chunk of sandalwood and amber, but you have a very full range of spices in here, from cumin to cinnamon to cardamom, and because of that very kind of full range and the mixture with woody and some sandalwood and all of that together, I think it's not so much just a clove fragrance or just a bay leaf fragrance or something. It's actually got the full range of them. And what I want to add as well too is I think even within the category of spicy perfumes, as we were just saying, you could really break that down further in that you have some that are a bit more peppery, right? And even within them, the kind of black pepper or the pink pepper, or you've got the more anise types, as we just reviewed recently. There's so many subdivisions within spicy that I think it's interesting to kind of have things that just have an overall sense of spice. And I think that Tango is a really good example of spice treated as a whole broad component, if you will. Really, really nice wear, and it's a great introduction to that category of fragrance, I think.
The way you talk about it like that, John, I mean, it's a superb fragrance. I really like it as well. Do you have a favorite spice, do you think? or do you prefer them when they're more broad?
Yeah, do you know, it's funny. I find that I like all of them. Yeah, I like the treatment of them being broad, but I do find that sometimes when somebody investigates like a single spice, almost like a solid note, or in a perfume, that can be really fascinating. But I will say, if I were to choose, cardamom makes an amazing note in perfume. It's such a warm note under some conditions, and then it can go really cool in other conditions. It's a fascinating note in perfume in particular. So that would probably be my standout favorite, I'd say.
Yeah. What about
Yeah.
you, Adam?
Well, I don't know if I have one particular favorite spice in perfumery, but I am really interested by the idea of temperature and spice interacting. I feel like, most spiciness we associate with being very warm, and very warming, and paired with warm materials, cedar, woody amber materials. But I also am really curious to smell more cool spice perfumes, things like coriander from DS and Durga. But if I had to choose one, maybe I'd choose cardamom as well. It's just a really interesting material. It skews so many different ways, temperature wise, profile wise. It can be very woody, it can be very peppery, it can be somewhere in between. So I really do love cardamom as well. So I would agree with John's choice of that particular spice. How about you, Nicola?
Also cardamom.
Oh, really? Okay. I
Amazing.
guess it's just
Yeah.
cardamom across the board then.
Yeah.
I-
I really like peppers, black pepper, and I like what that does to a perfume. Um, but yeah, if I had to pick one, it would be cardamom. And just think it's gorgeous. It's so I can't get enough of it. When you get a scent that's got cardamom in, I really want to sniff it a lot. I'd kind of sniff it off my skin. But yeah, love it. Really good.
So who has another spicy perfume they'd like to talk about next?
I
Well,
think
you were
Adam
just
sounded
going
like
on about your favorite spice element, Nicola. So why don't you tell us about your favorite spicy perfume, or maybe not your favorite, like we said, your landmark spicy perfume?
Okay. So I struggled with this a bit because I love spicy fragrances. Was struggling with what to pick because there's too many, there's too many that I love. And I wanted to pick one that I thought was really good and interesting, but it's a difficult one because I think you could argue that it's also a floral. And so which category do you put it in? Do you put it in floral? Do you put it in spicy? It's La Mat by Mendita Rosa. And it's rose, immortelle, patchouli, nutmeg, clove, black pepper, geranium, and cashmere. So it's very the sort of main aspect of it for me is this interplay between rose and spices. And rose and spices is obviously something that comes up a lot. Megallium by Carna Barcelona is also a really good one. Ducalis by Angela Champagne is another nice one. Although that's slightly more liquor-like and jammy. But La Mat is one of my favourites because it's a floral, but it's so it's made so much more gritty and dark by the spices. It's more dramatic. It almost has this sense of the gothic about it. The spices are warm and they give it this real lift from the skin. It's a big fragrance. It's really big. The silage is amazing. It lasts forever, and I find the interplay between rose and spices really interesting anyway. And I think this is probably one of my favorite examples of that kind of alchemy that happens when you put them together. Because I think if you think of, I've got some lovely roses blooming in my garden at the moment, and if I think of going dousing them in pepper, I think, well, that's not going to work, is it? But actually, that's the magic of perfumery, is that it does, and somehow that balances and is beautiful with the immortelle and these other things as supporting players. But yeah, they're a really good, interesting house, and I think this is a really good, interesting perfume. yeah, I like its sense of drama.
Yeah, nice choice. Very nice choice. What about you, Adam?
My spicy choice is actually something that also features a good slug of Immortelle, and it's something that John had introduced me to originally. It's Eau Noir from Dior. Normally, I wouldn't prefer to talk about a discontinued fragrance on the pod, just because, you know, I hate to be like, hey, love this thing, you can't get it. But we recently found out that Dior is bringing this perfume, as well as a couple of other previously discontinued Privé lines, back. So I don't think it will be brought back in this formulation entirely, but I do think it will likely at least resemble enough the original so as to be called Eau Noir still. So with that aside, you know, the spices in this one are, I'd say, licorice or an anise kind of note, vanilla, saffron, but those things are boosted by, you know, herbaceous notes as well. Immortelle is a big spice here, but Immortelle kind of, for me, it kind of straddles between that line of like herbaceous versus spicy. It's kind of in between to me. Maybe that's just my perception, but it's a really interesting material that undoubtedly has a spicy edge. And cedar and coffee notes are also included in Eau Noir. And I chose this one because it's such an uncompromising display of spice. You know, it's a scent that kind of dares to make spices seem dark and almost a little bit unfriendly in a certain way. Where, you know, like I said before, you know, the spicy genre typically tends to make spices feel very warm and very tame and very almost holiday-esque. And there are a lot of positive associations with spicy qualities. And absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think we all like a little comfort in our fragrances fairly often, but Dior Eau Noir, it's got this very like almost unsettling quality about it that I really find addicting. I wouldn't call it an unfriendly perfume, but it isn't necessarily that Christmas baked goods gourmandish leaning spice. It's a very suffice it to say, it justifies noir being in the name.
Yeah, that's
And
really
I
intriguing.
think it's a great choice, actually, Adam, because it's such an unusual use of spice, that which is what really drew me to it too. Because I probably wouldn't initially think of it as a sort of spice fragrance, and yet of course it's a spice fragrance, right? It's just such an unusual combination of things, and dosed in such a strange way, you know. But what a great example, you know, um, in a way, almost, and you can even kind of call it a sort of like highly spiced fougere in a way, because it's got a kind of little bit of a fougere sort of ishness to it at the bottom, you know. But yeah, very cool
Absolutely.
example.
There's vanilla, which of course is a spice. I mean, I think we all count vanilla as a spice material, but then there's
Yeah.
a bit of lavender too. So I see what you mean. There's definitely a fougere element in this too, which kind of makes one scratch their head at this perfume a little bit. It's sort of all over the place, but in the best of ways.
Totally. Yeah, that's
And I
excellent.
suppose it's another good example of how pigeonholing stuff into one category doesn't always work if you can, you know,
Yeah.
because you see vanilla in something, and you think, oh, it's got to be a either a spicy or a gourmand. And I think vanilla is a really difficult material for that, because where do you put it? Because sometimes it's quite woody as well. So, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's quite smoky. You know, where does it go? And I guess it comes back to that idea that you can't just judge a perfume by its notes list. You've got to really get your nose on it and work out um, where it sits within your kind of oeuvre or your
Mhm.
wheelhouse. But on that note, I wanted to ask you both, you know, we're talking about these 10 fairly standard families. Are there any other families that exist within your sort of thought processes of perfume? Are there any other families that inform how you think about scent?
You know, I was thinking about that as we first started talking, and when Adam mentioned, I'm sorry, no, Nicola, you mentioned how we could expand, and this could turn into 50 or 100 sort of subdivisions. And immediately I started to fill in my brain what those subdivisions would be. And I started to think of things like soapy fragrances or powdery fragrances, or specific floral notes, which I think goes to what Adam talked about, which are, you know, favorite iris, favorite rose, favorite tuberose, favorite you know, and then all those kind of very odd, strange flowers that we don't, you know, hear about as much, like freesia or frangipani and things like that. So I guess it's funny because I like to both go broad, and then sometimes I really like to kind of delve into the weird and spiky, you know, like soapy fascinates me, you know, and because it's not really a specific note per se, but it's more of a sensation, and which can be arrived at by a number of different methods, right? You know, it's usually a couple of things that might contribute to soapy, but I don't think that people really set out to say, oh, we're going to, you know, put a big soapy note in here. I mean, it just kind of ends up being soapy, you know. So it may be partially about the intentionality and then what you end up getting, but yeah, there's definitely a number of other categories that I keep thinking of.
Maybe if listeners really enjoy these, we should do a third one that's kind of kooky fragrance categories that we just make up.
Agree. Best plastic or best, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
what about you, Adam? Have you got any?
Honestly, we did miss one. I think, technically speaking, I mean, we're making up the rules. This is our show. We'll talk about them as we see fit. But I mean, you know, I guess you could say that we missed musky in our initial list of like very broad categories, musky perfumes. But that's also maybe due to the fact that, you know, musky materials are found in almost any perfume. Just, you know, go to a huge store with hundreds of fragrances on the rack, choose one at random, and it's bound to have some sort of musk involved in it. I mean, it's just such a pervasive material that it's its own category. Sure, there are tons of musk-driven perfumes, but I mean, it's such a broadly used material that, you know, not every fragrance is made with a material that somebody would categorize as aromatic. Not every perfume is made using a material somebody might categorize as aquatic or citrus, but certainly almost every fragrance is used with something that falls under the musk umbrella. So, you know, that's just sort of the reality of intentionality versus what's used and how it's made. And we could go on forever about that. But I do love the idea of us doing a separate part 3, so to speak, of just more, as you said, kookier categories. I think I would probably choose like poolside aquatics, you know, like or something that's very specific, like suntan lotion kind of sense. Those
Nice,
you know,
nice.
those types of fragrances.
Yeah.
Nicola, do you have a woody perfume you'd like to highlight?
Yeah. So I, like John described with the spicy, I really struggled as to whether to go broad woody, you know, lots of different types of wood. But then, you know, I've probably talked before about my just lifelong love affair with sandalwood. And I thought, nah, sod it, I'm just going to pick a sandalwood perfume. So I picked Zadig and Voltaire's This Is Her. And I've probably spoken about this one before, but it's just really good. It's a powdery, big sandalwood. It doesn't smell like a complicated fragrance. It doesn't smell like it requires a lot of attention or demands a lot of effort from you in order to wear it. But it does sandalwood in a really big, shiny, effervescent kind of way. And I just really think it's a good example. It's a strong example of sandalwood, particularly for a relatively, you know, widely available scent. So yeah, that's my pick.
I'm very curious about how you just said that it's like a bright and like sandalwood usually for me oftentimes goes, you know, either kind of more the middle road or a bit deeper, but that sounds almost like it's got an effervescence or a sparkly side to it.
Yeah,
it's interesting for a sandalwood fragrance.
it's quite summery. It has a slightly, obviously, like a milky tone. It's got a slightly plasticky vibe to it, which I find quite interesting and quite like fascinating. And there's definitely some powdery elements in there too. Yeah, it does. It's bright. It's not a deep dark resinous sandalwood. It's a bright and quite a happy one, really. Quite comforting. Quite, yeah. There is something summery about it. And it does, if you wear it when it's warm, it really does. It sort of shimmers off skin. It really does radiate nicely. And yeah, it's just if somebody's looking to start, if somebody wants to kind of go out there and isn't sure what sandalwood smells like, I think this fragrance would be a good starting point to then start exploring the genre of sandalwood more, because it's not difficult. And you do get, I wouldn't imagine that it's got like the world's best quality sandalwood in it. I think it's probably lots of nice recreations or fractions or whatever, but it's just really good. It's a solid example as far as I'm concerned. And I have smelled a lot of sandalwoods.
What about you, Adam? What's your selection for woody fragrance?
I had the same trouble, Nicola, of which wood or a number of different woods. It turns out that the perfume I chose has a few different woody tones in it, different species, if you will, represented. And it would not be one of our recording sessions without a cat appearing. She's a bit shy. I will note, anybody who's a longtime viewer of here we go, of the Fragrantica talks will know that Finnegan is usually the one who interrupts, but this one is Magnolia, and I have to say, you might not ever see her again, just because she is very shy usually, but she just spent a few days at grandma's house, so she is very lovey right now. So she's in a quite a state. So I'm kind of happy that Fragrantica gets to see Magnolia, because Finnegan is usually the one who butts in. But anyway, back to the fragrance. I chose something called Amber Kiso from Dias and Durga. Now, I know that the name would make you think amber, and it certainly is an amber perfume. There's no getting around that. But honestly, I think the success of its amber note is really hinged on all of the woody notes that are playing around with it. We've talked, I think, on the podcast before, if not in articles before, about how you need that metaphorical kind of grit in the pearl to make something like an amber note or any other kind of sweet note really sing and to feel balanced in a fragrance. And I think in this case, it's sort of the woodiness of Amber Kiso that helps the sweetness of its amber to shine here. So I wanted to stress that point because I think woody notes in general are so important to perfumery, and many woody materials are used in perfumes that for specific functional reasons. Oh, there she goes. So I think it's safe to say that perfumery is sort of built on woody materials just as much as it's built on floral ones. You look in the base notes of so many perfumes. Again, it's one of those situations where you go to a store and you just kind of pick something. And at the base of that fragrance that you randomly pick, you're likely to find some material that has a woody edge to it. It's just sort of one of those foundational material types and category types that is really found everywhere. I feel like that clip of that news anchor who was interrupted by a child just running into his anyway, so I wanted to just, with that spiel out of the way, I wanted just to say that Amber Kiso has no shortage of woody notes, as well as the key central amber accord has notes of cypress, of a rarely used maple accord, hinoki, and even some patchouli that I think in this case is actually rendered in a fairly woody way. So, Amber Kiso is a surprising masterclass for me in woody tones, and it makes the amber that much more unique of an amber accord because those materials of woody nature are kind of pushing it forward right off the skin. It has an explosive sillage to it for that reason.
That's really, really cool. And I was going to say, what I think I'm noticing is a trend here is that, and if you think for a moment, there really aren't a lot of fragrances that are just pure wood and nothing else, right? There's not much that, because I think it might be a little too just foundational and not, perhaps not rich enough really. So to both of your examples, like wood is just kind of a more or less a sort of starting point. And perhaps with the exception of sandalwood, you'll see occasionally like more of a solid note of sandalwood, because that's a bit of a richer element. But aside from that, not too often.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, I think a good way for people to think about it is they're the drums in the rock band. The woods are the, they're the drums that kind of keep it all moving forward. They give it power, they
Right.
ground it. They're not the kind of the guitars over the top or the
Right.
floaty vocals. They might be more the florals, but the
Right.
woods are what keeps it solid, keeps it
Right.
moving.
Right. Very good point. Very good point.
Then I think it's you, John, right? You have a woody pick, no doubt.
I do, and I'm sort of glad I was a little worried that you both have chosen the route you have, because I also chose something that I don't know if people would necessarily say, oh, that's not a woody perfume. And I want to actually thank my friend Tanner, who just recently visited, and he gave me this nice decant of a Tom Ford, which is Fougère Platine. And so that's a fougere. That's not a woody perfume. But no, I consider this. It's a very deeply woody fragrance, and it veers a bit into the aromatic. I mean, there is clary sage. There's some citrus on the top, but at the base of this fragrance, which you kind of delve into very quickly. I mean, there's certainly a lot happening at the top, including some labdanum and some olibanum and a bit of Artemis. There's just this incredibly dark but rich base, mixing tobacco and wood together. But you reach that almost immediately. So instead of being kind of lost in, I shouldn't say lost, but instead of just being adrift in this kind of lavender haze for a while, this just goes kind of straight to that woody element that I think is incredibly rich and is a bit imaginative too, as well. As I think there's a bit of a fantasy idea of what is kind of like our idea in our head about like what kind of wood chips and cedar chips and everything kind of all together in a bag. What would that sort of smell like? And it's almost amplified. So it's almost like a cartoon, a slightly even cartoonish idea of what that woody smell is like. But I want to stress too that I think as Nicola, you had just said about the kind of important base and supporting role that wood plays, this is a great example. And so I would definitely say that Fougère Platine by Tom Ford, this is a great introduction to what a good solid wood fragrance would smell like for me.
Does that, I mean, I know we talk about scents and we all are of the mind that anything can be worn by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think wood is perhaps something that certain people, people may typically associate with skewing more towards the masculine end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's the case with Fougère Platine, or do you think it's very unisex?
It's an interesting call. I would definitely say this one feels pretty unisex to me. And for the most part, I think it's interesting because I've found that the fougere genre just traditionally is so steeped in what appears to be more of a sort of masculine, I don't know how you'd put it, but it's had more of a position in a masculine sort of subculture. And I think it's based on the whole barbershop idea, of shaving and whatnot. But I've noticed, particularly in the last 10 years, that even that has, as fougères have gotten more experimental and have expanded in what can be a fougère, the idea of it being so settled in sort of a masculine definition has also kind of blurred quite a lot. And I've found that there are a lot of women who really like that, particularly because they often do rely on lavender as a base. And I think that traditional formulas for lavender perfumes often leave people a bit cold, like they're looking for something a little more interesting and gritty in a lavender fragrance. And that's what often a fougere provides, I think is a much more interesting use of lavender. So yeah, I definitely think it's a unisex fragrance. Yeah. And our next grouping is the aromatic, which is pretty wild, right? Because that could encapsulate a lot of different things, right? But I think I'd like to, if we could, just spend a moment or two just talking about, well, what actually, what defines the aromatic? Like, what actually is that? Anybody want to jump in and say, well, I think that I could start a bit and say what I think what aromatic is.
Well, yeah, I was just about to suggest that because my pick kind of has that definition baked in a little bit. So let's start with you, John.
Yeah, sure. So I think that aromatic is it's kind of funny. It's a bit of it kind of can be almost substituted sometimes for what we would consider the green category, in that it often involves things like herbs. In particular, I think the things that or herbs, as some people would say, the cross section between herbs and spices and green grasses. And I think when I walk outside in the garden, and then I come into the kitchen, I've often thought the garden, the kitchen, there's a lot of the aromatics are between those two places, right? So things like bay leaves and leaves in the garden, and like perennial plants in the garden, like a lot of those things often are characteristic of the aromatic. A lot of the herbs and spices that end up in liqueurs and whatnot tend to be very aromatic. So it's an interesting subsection of stuff. Often the things that you see in like herbariums from medieval Europe, like those seem to be, I categorize as like the medicinal stuff is kind of aromatic in a sense too. So it's a big category that could all fit in. So in keeping with that, I could just jump in with my choice then. And so I chose something that is not a frequent wear for me, but it's something I definitely like a lot. And it sort of touches on those sort of, it's got touches of the fougere and touches of the spicy. This is Cooper Square by bottle number 9, which some people hate their bottles, but I love the fact that in this one it's etched so that it's actually clear in some cases and metallic in other cases. So you're actually seeing sunlight stream through there, which is pretty crazy. But what I find very intriguing about this is that it has a bit of an amber profile and a bit of cashmere with some musk in here, but it also has juniper, like a very standout juniper. And to me, juniper berry is almost like the poster child for aromatic. It's a bit green, it's a bit herbal, it's a bit spice. So gin is like, the smell of gin is extremely aromatic to my mind. This also has a big dose of olibanum in here, so a little kind of frankincense, some labdanum as well. But that bit of amber, little touch of lavender, a little touch of vetiver as well, but that really standout juniper berry that's at the top, which kind of starts to float down into the middle, is really nice in terms of an aromatic. But that's me, hey, that's my definition of aromatic. Who'd like to jump in there?
I'd like to. I would say that when I think about aromatic perfumes, I think what we're talking like this normally denotes like a mix of like herbs and spices for the most part. I think some people define it more on the herbal spectrum, but I think you giving the example of gin, I think most people would agree that a gin accord would qualify as an aromatic type of accord, and I think that the success of gin is juniper, which is woody and herbaceous, but then you also have some spices too that make most gin profiles the way they are. So this couldn't have happened at a more perfect time, because I've been really getting into gin lately. I love the drink quite a bit. It's very, very fascinating. Very fascinating.
Into the gin a lot lately, is it, as well as getting into gin?
What if I just pulled out a bottle right now? No, I might talk like I've been into the gin a lot lately, but no, I just really do love the material. And so I think it's a good example though, John, because it has that complex. I think aromatic perfumes tend to have like that sort of complex of herbs or spices, more than one typically. And I think that, maybe even sometimes florals might count if it's a particularly assertive floral like geranium. And in that case, I did choose a geranium forward fragrance that also has some mint and some spice notes. It's Geranium pour Monsieur from from Frederick Mall. Now, I know that Nicola, probably this might be completely out of your wheelhouse. You generally despise geranium, is that correct?
Yeah, I did think, oh no. When you picked that one, I was like, I could, when you started, you said for geranium, I thought, and then you said, the other notes, I thought, oh God, he's going for that one. And I know people are going to at me in the comments, but I just really don't like it. It's horrible. It smells like cat wee.
Okay. It's a great perfume.
I feel bad that note has that association for you, but it does make me more so just wonder where along the lines you get that from. I mean, I don't disagree. I think I know what you're talking about, but it's like, I wonder, like, where along in somebody's like life cycle do they associate? Like, what happened to you, Nicola? Were you locked in a basement with a cat at some point?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think I must have been. But actually, I've got lots of positive associations with geraniums because my grandma, they were my granddad's favourite flower, and my granddad died 13 years before my grandma, and she always used to buy geraniums and red geraniums and plant them in the garden for him. And so I think of them really fondly, but I think my dislike of the smell of them came from helping her do that as a child. And when you get it on your hands and your sense of smell so strong as a child, and just smelling it and being like, I can't get this off my skin fast enough. And it's just sort of stuck, I'm afraid.
No, I hear you there. Well, so something that I've talked about a lot and mentioned earlier is that I'm always on the hunt for something kind of cool in temperature, just because I associate it with summer. I associate, that kind of temperature or perceived temperature and fragrance with, relaxing times in my life. And so I discovered geranium pour Monsieur not only because it's talked about a lot and referenced a lot as a mint forward perfume, despite the name. I discovered it when I was sort of on that cooling kick and discovering perfumes that are like that. And now I'm really fascinated by it, because I don't know how long it's been since you've smelled it, Nicola, and it might probably, as you say, probably won't ever become something that you would ever want or reach for. But the thing that makes geranium pour Monsieur really interesting to me is that it actually has quite a lot of other things going on besides geranium and mint. There's this, it's just sort of like comes across as this big like blast of something, right? And in this case, the something is a mix of spices that we typically associate with being warm spices. We're talking cinnamon, probably arguably the warmest of warm spice associations there. I think there's a clove note used in this, and there's an anise or accord in this as well. And I'm blown away by it every single time, because when you smell, obviously you're going to smell like the big like blast of icy mint and geranium and earth, a little bit of an earthy touch to the geranium as well. But it's that sort of complex of, very piquantly aromatic things that makes it so interesting to me and so nuanced to me, that I really always come back to it as soon as it starts to warm up outside, and sometimes even when it's very cold outside. It's just very very evocative for me. And I think that the spices kind of lend it that weighty heft in the middle section of a perfume, where I think sometimes the thing about aromatic or specifically herbal perfumes, I think sometimes when they start to dry down a little bit, whether it's a synthetic or a natural material that is very herbaceous, sometimes there's like this really woody touch to them that I often enjoy. But there's this woody dry down note to many herbaceous materials. And what I like about geranium pour Monsieur is that it actually doesn't do that at all. It goes into like this really breezy kind of musk complex in the dry down, and it sort of avoids all of those woodier notes that herbaceous perfumes tend to have intrinsically in them. And that's sort of another reason why I find it really fascinating. So yeah, that's my pick for an aromatic perfume. I think I associate aromatic perfumes because of this one with that like blast of a complicated, like almost gaseous like experience. And I think that geranium pour Monsieur definitely kind of just wafts off the skin in a very unique way that I really enjoy.
Nice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting as well that you picked up on anise in that, because my pick for aromatics is Liquor by Angela Champagne, which also
Yeah.
this bottle is stunning. Um, and oh, it's just gorgeous, this perfume. This is definitely one of my favorites, as well as one that I think is a good example of an aromatic. It's got lavender, violet, lemon, licorice, anise, hay, coumarin, vetiver, tonka, and incense. And the thing that I find really just gorgeous about it is the smell of if you imagine cutting a meadow in Italy, and then leaving the grass to dry in the hot sunshine all day, and then just as dusk, starts to fall and it gets a little bit cooler, just going and lying in that cut grass, that's now sort of mostly hay, and you get those lovely fragrant strands, and the air's cooler. It's not, it's not baking hot anymore. It's cooler, and you can smell all the different plants that make up the hay. You get the different nuances. Some of it's more grassy, some of it's more floral, some of it's almost that has that like vetiver-y, aromatic, grassy dryness about it. And it's just gorgeous. It's such a transportive fragrance, and it's the anise and licorice in it I just find so calming. I picked it for my best in show for licorice. It's an anise sense, but it is just beautiful. And if I'm ever feeling like anxious, if I just go and smell this or put it on, it immediately just brings me back down, and I just think, oh, it's that summer, summer relaxation, but a real sort of countryside feel to it. It feels natural. It feels like being in nature. It feels like lying on the ground, sort of being grounded and calm and centered, and as well as being just the right temperature, like not too hot, not too cool, just nice. It's like it's ease personified in a bottle. I don't even know, that's not even the right word, but you know what I mean. It's kind of it's that sense of ease distilled, and it's just really lovely. I can't really rate Angela Champagne's fragrances highly enough. They are so thoughtful, so they have a real sense of almost like mythology about them. There's something a bit gothic, a bit dark about them, a bit folkloric. And I want to inhabit the world that she inhabits when she creates them, because I think it would be really interesting. Like, it's sort of, you imagine, kind of what I imagine a pagan type ceremonies going on, and torches burning and midnight and that sort of thing, secret tunnels and old stone and all that stuff. It's all in the world that these fragrances come from. And this one is one of my favorites. It's on the lighter end of that spectrum that she has, but it's still, there's like a real sense of magic in it. And that just really appeals to me. And it's, I think aromatic was a category when we were looking through these categories and starting to think about them. Aromatic was the one that I struggled with most, because I think I probably have least scents in my collection that can be classed as aromatic. And the other one I immediately thought of was Cacao Aztec by Paris Monte Carlo, which is a lovely fragrance. But it does a weird thing, and I don't know if it's just me, but you look at the notes and they're, you would kind of probably classify it as a gourmand of some variety. It's got, let me just pull the notes up, it's got cardamom, pink pepper, black pepper, tuberose, pittosporum, rum, orchid, cacao pod, sandalwood, leather, and musk. But there's a weird thing that happens when I smell it, which is I get a really strong lavender from it. And I don't know if anybody else has had that or if it's just me, but there is a real weird, it's like some of the notes working together make this like lavender spectre. And so I find that one quite aromatic. but I don't think I didn't pick it for this because I thought it's not actually a typical aromatic, or it's not a particularly good example of an aromatic, because it just does a weird thing in my head, somewhere between my nose and my brain. But also a really good fragrance and a really nice one to wear.
I was really curious what the sort of setting that you were building up there with the Angela Campagna fragrance, and it was actually it was quite beautiful, but also a bit, you know, mystical, fairy tale like, of just the hay field and you know, the dusk setting in and whatnot. I think because of the fact that I felt like that was sort of a timeless setting that could have happened like 300 years ago even, right? You know, the same.
Yeah.
That was really intriguing to me, and I think there is something about the aromatic stuff, like I mentioned, it made me think of the medieval type thing. Like there's something very timeless about aromatic smells. Or I associate with just the whole ilk of it could be something that was made yesterday or centuries ago, and they all fit. Maybe I know, Adam, if you feel the same way, it kind of has that feel to it, you know, in the aromatic category.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, Geranium pour Monsieur captures my imagination because it's one of the few fragrances in the aromatic category that I don't have those kinds of associations with. I would say I usually do have those associations that you're talking about with the aromatic category of fragrances, but Geranium pour Monsieur to me kind of feels a little bit more ultra modern in a way, but it depends on kind of, I guess, my mood too, wearing it that day. If I'm wearing clothes that are very relaxed versus if I'm wearing clothes that are, you know, a little bit more professional.
I think sometimes there's something a little bit savory about them. You know, with spices, you know, the spice category generally, it can bend towards the gourmand. Whereas I think with the aromatics, we are talking about things that are a little bit more savory, or things that could less easily be mistaken for gourmand. And I tend to think when you get a gourmand fragrance, you are talking about a modern scent. You know, you think about all your big famous gourmands, they are modern. Whereas the aromatics, I think you're right, they can be timeless because you could be smelling something that really existed. You know, you could be smelling an apothecary's shop or hay fields, and that could be yesterday or it could be 300 years ago. And I think that's the appeal of them in a lot of ways. When you find one that you really like, it can transport you to wherever you want it to take you.
Yeah, I do, and I do think that whole transportive aspect is such to me it's a really appealing aspect of fragrance, and I, you know, I'm sure for many of the listeners and watchers, it's probably a pretty wild, you know, part of perfume as well.
So speaking of materials that could bend gourmand, we did choose citrus as a category, and I'm curious to know what both of your picks are for the citrus category.
I could jump in on citrus. I've found it's kind of funny that I realized that I really love citrus fragrances. You know, looking through opening up the big cabinet over there, I was like, God, you have a lot of citrus fragrances, John. Which, had you asked me, do you have a lot of citrus fragrances, John? I probably would have said, I don't know. I don't think I have that many, but I do have a lot of. So I had much from which to choose, and I decided to go with a real standby. I think I think there was this golden period of citrus fragrances between like 1960, 1980. There were some of the real classics made in those decades. And one great one, I think this is from the early 70s, is Eau d'Orange Vert by Hermes. It's a completely simple, it's a cologne concentrate. I want to say it lasts a maximum of 3 hours on your skin, you know, which is as it should be. It's a really almost spicy mandarin with a little bit of a whole bunch of different, I mean, it comes in these mega dose bottles, so you can, you know, douse yourself in it, you know, and you will not offend a soul, which is another thing I love about citrus fragrances, is that you should like swash like crazy as far as I'm concerned. That's part of the joy of them, really. You know, and I do want to sort of check on what is the whole, you know, what's all in this thing. But what does set this apart a bit, I knew there was one kind of funny note in here. It has oak moss in here, which is the one sort of base note, which is unusual. You'd expect there to be kind of like a wood or something. The rest is like orange, mandarin, lemon, mint. There's a bit of patchouli. It's not terribly, I'd say the oak moss is what actually stands out more. And there's a slight off note in here, almost like that slightly sulfurous note you get from like grapefruit skins or something. But it comes from cassis. And so together, what I love about it is that it's sort of that citrus, absolute citrus perfection, where it's not sweet. It's a zesty, springy, green orange mandarin that is you know, just completely bracing, completely very zesty, very you know, it would really wake your skin up, of course, in the morning. And it has a lifespan, and it's definitely what you put on in the morning. And then if you were gonna, you know, put on something else the rest of the day, you might have like a faint trail of it left, and you could obviously wear something else at night. But I think that the fact that it holds to that as it doesn't try to be a citrus that'll last for 24 hours. It actually just holds to its strength as a short-lived kind of citrus on skin, and that it really is for the morning. You know, I don't think you'd put this on at night. I love that about it. And they haven't really changed the formula at all since the 70s. I mean, it may have slightly different technical formulation, but it smells the same as it did, pretty much. Yeah, that's my pick. It's not that complex, which is sort of what I like about it, you know, to be frank.
I think that's sort of the pattern in citrus fragrances, isn't it? Is like most of the time we have these associations with citrus perfumes as being like, oh, they're not always the most complex things in the world, but they're so pleasing, right? They do what they promise, and they have sort of likewise an association of joy and happiness and brightness to them that not every category has innately. So that's something that's very special about citrus perfumes. And, you know, look, when I was thinking about what fragrances I was going to bring today for the citrus category, I had every intention of, you know, being contrarian and finding a citrus perfume that I thought was incredibly complex and, you know, like, hey, you know, I know we think about citruses in this sort of lighthearted way, but they can be serious too. And, you know, I didn't. I didn't. I chose something that is really an old standby for me in the citrus realm. And it is simply Orange Sanguine from Atelier Cologne. You know, listen, it's so good. It's just it's very happy making, right? It's very aptly named. The, you know, having sanguine in the title is terribly apropos. It's to me, okay. They list a couple of different types of oranges in the note list from Atelier Cologne, and they list, I think the base notes have tonka bean and sandalwood and amber accord, and there's maybe some geranium mixed in there too. Nicola's, you know, over there like, but I frankly, I don't get any of that really. I obviously it has this sort of like something of substance. I sprayed it on my wrist right before we started talking. It has something of substance other than citrus notes, but what Atelier Cologne has always been very good at is sort of taking a citrus note and sort of expanding it a little bit so that it lasts a little bit longer on the skin than you would normally associate citruses to last. But it's never that distracted from the main citrus note that's referenced in the name. And I believe that there are two types of orange oils or orange accords used in this. But really what you get is that scent of orange right after, you know, you've been messing around with one and peeling one with your hands, and you wait for another 20 minutes and you just get that residual oil still barely hanging on your hands after you've been peeling it. I also get, I'm sorry to keep on referencing temperature, but like I get like I've been doing this in an air-conditioned room kind of a feeling from smelling this. Maybe it's some sort of strange interaction of the materials used in the base notes of this perfume. But I definitely get sort of like a cool association once again with it. It does smell mostly though of that the scent of orange oil on your skin after you've been peeling one. It's not that supremely juicy kind of smell that many orange accords go for. There's a bit of juiciness in it, but it's not like a huge sugar fest of juicy orange. It's more of like that kind of ethereal oil on the rind kind of smell, and that's what I really love about it. It nails that perfectly. And if you like citrus, there's no reason not to have at least a little spray of this. It's just so pleasant if you need some kind of joy association with wearing fragrance on any particular day. I reach for this all year round, so it's a great one to have.
That sounds wonderful, because I happen to really love orange scented fragrances, and I haven't found very many good ones. So I may just purely based on your recommendation pick some of that out, because
I feel like a lot of citrus fanatics know this already and are very intimately familiar with it at this point. No matter where you stand on it, it's really worth trying. I think it's a really big landmark achievement for the brand, because it really smells like orange, but not that big sugar, like high C juicy rush that you normally associate with the note. So it's really worth checking out, John.
Yeah, cool.
We have another pet visitor.
Yeah, that's Winnie, who loves to sleep.
I can see that. She just kind of came into frame and went, there we go. How about you, Nicola? What's your I was about to say what's your orange pick, but I dare not assume. What is your citrus pick?
I've gone lemon. Well, lemon and yuzu. So I'm going to caveat that. So this is Still Life in Rio by Olfactive Studio. I really like it. But from reading Fragrantica reviews, I have to caveat this by saying mine's an older bottle. Now, a lot of people are complaining that this has been killed in the reformulation, and I haven't smelt a bottle recently. I think my bottle's about 5 or 6 years old. So yeah, that's the kind of what's the word? That's the edition I'm thinking of is one from about 5 or 6 years ago. But it's a great citrus. It's a big, happy lemon and yuzu. It's uplifting, it's bright, it's sunny. It's got that real vivaciousness. It's another one that just makes you happy when you put it on your skin. I like that it's got a kind of heavier base with the leatheriness in there, because it does last quite well. I think the shorter lived citruses, I certainly have in the past sometimes found them a little bit frustrating, because I love the smell of citrus so much and I love the uplift of it, but I don't typically reapply during the day, particularly when I'm working out of the house. So I find ones that are a bit short-lived. I think that there's a use for them, definitely, but I want to smell of my scent all day. And this, for me, I do, particularly if I get some on my clothes as well. A lot of people talk about the coconut milk in this, which I don't really get very much of. I get a little bit of it, but not loads. To me, it is just, big old citrus. It's got mandarin orange in it too. But one of the interesting facets, and I'd be interested to know what you both think about this as well, is ginger. Now, ginger, I suppose, technically a spice, but I find it acts as like a citrus in quite a lot of fragrances. Is that something you two have noticed as well, or would you agree with that, or am I being a bit mad?
I think that it can do what, and I'll tell you from a raw material perspective, it's kind of strange, because I've smelled some ginger that's very dirty and rooty smelling, like it really just got pulled out of the ground, and that is very different from what I sort of smell as the sort of ground up spice. Having said that, I've also smelled like CO2 extractions of like red ginger root, which are really effervescent and like far more like your ginger ale feel of ginger, which does become more like a citrus, or in the way that like frankincense sometimes has almost a citrus and lemony type quality to it. So I definitely know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah.
So citrus was a good category, I think. I
Yeah.
too have quite a lot that I could pick from.
Yeah.
I think it's a very easy category. I think it's probably one of the categories that helps people get into perfume in the first place.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I think it's a I think it's I've rarely heard anyone refer to, a really depressing citrus fragrance, so it tends to be, although now I'm on a hunt for the sad, depressing citrus fragrance,
Yeah, where is the Eeyore citrus? I really need to
Yes,
know.
right. Yeah, right. Although I do tend to think that if one were to have, what would be the most depressing of all the citruses out there, right? What would that be?
Oh,
Would
it's
that
the
be
kumquat. It's the kumquat. The
Is that
kumquat is a very depressing
yes.
citrus.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. I was going to say something. Well, no, I was going to, no, I was going to first say yuzu, but I don't think that's true because it's actually got a nice smell. Maybe like shiso leaves or something, or I don't know. Anyway,
I think you have a lot of room to make mandarin into something not necessarily happy, but not necessarily sad either, more like a sultry kind of material, if I'm
true.
honest.
I could see that,
But
right?
yeah, a depressing citrus material is hard to come by, I think, in short supply.
Yeah, right, right.
Well, to your quick point, Nicola, though, I did want to tell you that I did look up while you were talking about sensing some citrus notes in ginger, and a GCMS analysis of ginger oil does show a lot of limonene and linalool and nerol and geraniol, which are all aroma chemicals that are used to make up citrus accords for sure. So, I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't feel that way. You are right scientifically.
Good. I'm glad.
Don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
So I've got a question for you both, which is, we've talked about spicy, we've talked about woody, aromatic, and citrus today. So far, if you had to only keep one of those, which one would you keep? Actually, let's save it till the end. But I'm going to ask you that at the end because
it's good that you brought that question up. I'm going to be nervous already.
Yeah, so I want you can only keep one of those categories. Which one? And we'll add aquatic to that too because that's our next category.
Yeah.
Should we jump on into aquatics and then end our discussion with that very difficult question?
Yeah, with a very difficult question, but that's a good one. Yeah, let's jump into aquatics. Let's jump into the pool of aquatics.
The pool of aquatics.
There he goes with the puns. So I don't know where exactly you two stand on aquatics, because obviously this is a category that I think brings a range of reactions from different perfume nerds like us. I mean, I think for many people, they get introduced to some sense, depending on when they were born specifically, through the aquatic realm. If they were coming of perfume wearing age in the 90s, I think most people of that kind of status would know aquatics very well, even if they don't particularly like to wear them. So where do both of you stand on this genre? It's a really highly contested genre.
I mean, I could go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, I'm going to say I have an unusual kind of place on it where I feel, well, actually, I'd be curious. I'm really curious to hear what you both say, but I've noticed, first of all, I used to, like many kind of perfumery folks, I think there's a lot of folks out there who just say, oh, I hate aquatics. And then I grew to see this sort of interesting flip in the perfume community where they started to sort of come back into not even necessarily fashion, but I think there was a re-examination of, well, what can aquatics be in fragrance and what are they? Because I think we had this sort of limited amount of chemicals available that made that sort of aquatic sensation, and people began to re-explore them. And then you saw notes come into even natural notes like different kinds of algae and whatnot, and seaweed being used as natural notes. And so I think there's been this great re-examination of aquatics, and I've really enjoyed watching that in both artisanal fragrances, independent fragrances, and in the wider fragrance realm. So you've had the development of those kind of early Davidoff, cool water type of things, which I still think is interesting fragrance. And then there's more artisanal things. So it's been a very interesting field to watch, and I've grown much more drawn to it for its very peculiar but highly memory kind of memory prominent or memory pulling kind of characteristics. I think that's where I come in on it.
I think I would say the same thing, Jean. I really enjoy the sense memory associations, and again the temperature associations that I have with it. But I was curious to know what you thought, Nicola, of the aquatic genre in general.
I'm split too. There's those big 90s aquatics I really don't like. I think I and think because I think they're interesting, and I definitely get something from examining them. But I don't wear them, and I don't, I find them quite intrusive to wear all day. But I did think I'm going to really struggle with this genre, and then I looked in my cupboard and I thought, actually, no, I've got quite a lot of aquatics as well. But for me, they tend to be more, rather than the crashing ocean aquatics of the 90s. The stuff that I love is the more babbling brook type aquatics of the 2020s. So
I think I know which one you're going to be bringing today, Nicola. I'm curious to know if I'm correct.
I don't think you are. Which one? Go on. What's your guess?
What's my guess? I think it's that. Okay, I'll give two. I'll hedge my bets because you just said you have a lot more aquatics than you think you do, so that kind of throws a wrench into my confidence. But I would say maybe it's either a Pierre Guillaume or a I'm sorry, Arquiste.
Oh. You see, what I thought you might guess was "Wash Me in the Water" by 4,160 Tuesdays, which isn't my choice. And neither is it the Pierre Guillaume, purely because they are both excellent examples of the genre, but we've talked about them before, and I do worry that our listeners are going to be like, oh my god, they're on about another Pierre Guillaume again. It's like the PG nerds. But so I picked a different one from a lesser known British indie house called Parterre, and the scent is called Run of the River. And it is a lovely conjuring of a little babbling brook. And you talk about enjoying the temperature contrasts. Well, this has got a really cooling, sort of like you just put your feet in fast running water. And it's bracing, but not in a beat you over the head kind of way. It's quite a gentle sense of bracing. And it just has a really soothing, nice, slightly aromatic quality about it. It's a lovely little scent, underrated, and I don't think probably very well known outside of the UK. But the house is quite interesting because they try and grow certain ingredients on their estate in the south somewhere, Dorset maybe. And yes, they grow and then distill certain essences there.
Parterre, you said is the name of the
Parterre.
Oh, Parterre, sorry.
Parterre, I believe, from memory.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's my pick. It's a lovely little babbling brook of a scent. I hate to say it smells quite English, but it does feel like a little. To me, it's a very specific sort of stream running off a hillside. Just the sort of streams that just seem to appear out of nowhere that we get because we've got a lot of water here. And it's almost like you've happened upon it and you've just, taken your socks off and your hot hiking boots and just put your feet in. And it's like, oh, that's lovely, refreshing, nice, gorgeous.
You've sold me on it. This sounds awesome. Right up my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
How about you, John? What is your aquatic pick?
So I have one, but I'm actually going to quickly reference a second one because they're two really different takes on aquatic, and I think it's kind of important. So there's one recent aquatic that's gotten a lot of attention, and what I think is interesting about it is that it's sort of like a monster aquatic, and it's some people find it so strong and like almost repulsive, but it's really good, and it's sort of, anyway, it's called Mega Mare by Orto Parisi, and it got a lot of attention when it came out because it's just so over the top ridiculous, like aquatic, I think no one expected that he would make, God, it's, like it really is, it fills the room. And a friend of mine was here recently, and we sprayed like one spray on a strip, and the next day, like it's still pumping out this, like, I mean, and he doesn't list notes on his fragrances, so we have no idea what's in this. And it's it's all the things you associate with aquatics. It's sort of like, it's algae, it's bubbles, it's saline, it's, maybe there's some green things in here, but it's crazy. It's crazy. And it's darker than your kind of, there's nothing, there may be like a bit of a fruit and possibly a bit of citrus in here or something, but it's far more of the kind of, I would associate this more with things like mineral and oyster kind of smells than I would with things like, melon and cucumber and that kind of like aquatic. This is really almost sort of concrete industrial mineral kind of aquatic. So a beach like Revere Beach, Adam, which is actually the first public beach in the United States, which is interesting for some of our listeners out there. But it's accessible by T in Boston, which cracks me up that you can actually take the train to the beach, which is, tells you something about the beach. Oh my gosh. But I mean, like right now I have to throw this away because it's so loud, and that's, it's kind of unusual for an aquatic, but it's really, really loud. So that's a good one though for people who just want to understand the sort of the dynamics of modern aquatics. That's a big one. But very quickly, I just want to mention one other, because I think it's another side of aquatics that is very interesting, and that's from Santa Maria Novella. It's something called Cala Rosa, and this is made up of it's like the very cooling side of a more aromatic aquatic, which is a bit of immortelle, eucalyptus, and a couple of other very cooling spices. It's primarily eucalyptus more than anything, and a bit of an aquatic accord as well. And I liked this approach that they took to almost combining green and aquatic things together. And to use eucalyptus is one of those few natural ingredients that I think gives that sensation of water that we don't really have in a lot of other natural ingredients. And I really like that they used it in that way. So I definitely wanted to make a quick mention of that, because I think it's a very completely opposite way of achieving a watery aquatic type smell without really using this sort of 90s methodology, if you will.
John, have you smelled Every Storm a Serenade by Imaginary Authors, which is a monster aquatic? Is Megamari like that? Is it?
It is a bit. I would say that, to be frank, I would say that Every Storm a Serenade is a bit easier to wear and a little kinder on the skin. Like Megamari is really like crazy, and you need so little of it. And I still haven't quite figured out where it's best to wear this thing. Whereas Every Storm a Serenade, I feel is it's a little more like that could be an everyday wear almost. It's a really very pleasant fragrance. I like Megamari, I think, a lot for its audacity in a sense, but it's tough wear. It's pretty experimental.
If I may tell you a little anecdote before we move on to your choice, Adam. Another one that I find a little bit along those challenging aquatic lines is Nebbia Densa by Filippo Scorcinelli,
right? Yes.
And I was testing that, and I wore it to work one day, and the girl at the next desk, I didn't have very much on at all because I am as we've talked before, chronic undersprayer. And the girl at the next desk just looked over and she was like, "What are you wearing? You smell like Grimsby fish stocks." And she kept like wafting me all day, being like, "Oh God, you smell like Grimsby fish stocks." I did not wear it again.
That's amazing. Oh, well, that's pretty strong reaction, right? That's quite strong reaction.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
I love it.
Adam, what have you got for us?
So I went for another perfume that I think fans of the more modern aquatic genre will probably be familiar with. So I went with Acqua di Sale from Perfume Roma, and this is something that I think was sort of a trendsetter in like this new kind of renaissance of aquatics. I think it probably wasn't the first to do this formula, but this formula of very simple aquatic notes, salty notes, and myrtle slash white slash yellow florals. It, it seems to be, and maybe a little hint of seaweed in there too. It seems to be this formula now that I've seen copied quite a few different times, especially if you go onto the Fragrantica notes page for myrtle, you will see that flower or that note being used in other perfumes that also have salty and aquatic notes in them. Sort of like everybody's sort of riffing off of this perfume. I can see why. For me, I don't find this seaweed note that I mentioned in it to be too much at the forefront. I know that for many people, such as the person you sat next to, Nicola, any seaweed note is too much. Even if it's just a tenth of the way it smells, that might be far too much for some. And I did grow up near the ocean, so I'm very much used to that smell. I was also near some bogs, which kind of take that note and then intensify it even more in some parts of the year. So again, it's a kind of an acquired taste for me. I don't find that this perfume is anywhere near that level of intensity, but your mileage may vary. It's very much to me, it's very much balanced by the softer, more easygoing notes. There's like a very, very soft, fuzzy interpretation of cedar in this. There's that kind of salicylate suntan lotion effect that those materials have. So like I said before, there's this note of myrtle flower, which to me is criminally underutilized. Whatever myrtle smells like, I've never smelled the plant in isolation, and I think most myrtle notes are synthetic, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think that there's a very readily accessible myrtle extraction, natural extraction of any kind. I might be wrong about that, but whatever myrtle smells like in actuality is something I really want to be more familiar with, because I love the way it smells in Acqua di Sale. It's sort of rendered as this kind of hint at something vaguely floral. It's not powdery. It's not a typical golden flower. It's just very petally, but not indolic whatsoever. It's a very interesting floral used in this, and it's not very prominent at all. It's sort of like a watercolor kind of sheerness to it in terms of the floralcy of this perfume. But I definitely have those kind of summertime associations with this. It brings me back to my youth with the seaweed note involved, but it's just a very happy fragrance for me. And a very relaxing fragrance for me. So I definitely wear it whenever I know I'm about to do something that's just very fun and low key and relaxing. But it's really something that I could easily wear in the winter when I just hate the cold, which, as has been previously established, is a common occurrence for me. So it's just like, instead of being the water itself, right? This is sort of like a landscape aquatic, which I think is sort of the new trend in aquatics right now. It sort of depicts the shoreline itself, a little bit of the aquatic quality, water quality, as well as some of the flora and fauna that surround it. And that's definitely true of Acqua di Sale, but through even more of an ethereal quality, like a haze of memory of that thing rather than that thing itself. So
great. It sounds lovely. It does. That sounds really lovely.
I do think it's right up your alley, Nicola. I know that you're a big fan of that Pierre Guillaume fragrance that has that saltiness to it. I don't know why the name is escaping me, because I also love it now, and you turned me on to it, in fact. But you know the one I mean.
Sensuality, that one?
No, well, it very well might be similar to that one as well. Bois Naufrage. Yeah, I think any fan of Bois Naufrage or Sensuality from Pierre Guillaume really needs to check this one out. Acqua di Sale from Perfume Aroma.
I was just thinking about the question that you asked, Nicola, about if we were to have to choose one of the 5 children that we love most.
So is the question, do we mix all except for one of these fragrances, or
Yes.
all except for one of these categories?
Well, there you go. We've got 2 questions now.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Categories first. Got to get rid of all of them apart from one category. Spicy,
Categories first.
aromatic,
Okay.
citrus, or aquatic. Which one do you keep?
Yeah.
I think the one I keep is aromatic, because, and this might be cheating, right? But I would say Aqua de Sale is very aromatic. There's no aromatic notes listed, but it kind of follows in the footsteps of other aromatics insofar as the seaweed is kind of herbaceous. No, that's a cheap way to answer that question, isn't it? I would still say aromatic, just because you can't have a whole class of fougères without something aromatic behind it. In fact, I would argue you couldn't have fougères at all without aromatic. And fougères mean a lot to me. John and I have recorded a separate whole episode dedicated to them. And then I think you can't have some of the more interesting ambers that utilize those spicy, herbaceous blends at the top of the perfume that lead into the amber accord. I think aromatic perfumes, like you said before, Nicola, it's sort of a long tradition in perfumery too. So they have that sort of sense of timelessness that I think the perfume world would be hurting without. So I think I have to choose aromatic. How about you?
Yeah. Go on, John.
Well, it's funny. I was, as soon as Adam mentioned aromatic, I was thinking, oh, I'm probably going to say the same thing. And I was just sort of scanning the bottles over here, and I thought, I'm not so sure. I have to I think I'm going to default to saying I would choose citrus, and I'm a little surprised that I say that, but I, even from the most functional perspective, right? I look sometimes at the Fragrantica perfume yourself option, and I usually, I'm not religious. Like every day I click on what did I wear that day, but I try to keep it updated because I like that record. And without a doubt, I mean, for the days that I'm sure, as you all have, like days when you really are not sure quite what to wear, I end up defaulting to a couple of those sort of sunny, happy citruses that I know will really just pick my mood up. And I think, gosh, this is actually the use of fragrance as a function for me, which is, something that actually, kind of makes the day a little bit easier to get through. And so, strictly from a functional perspective, that kind of matters to me. And so I would probably default there. Yeah. And I would say citrus, I'd have to keep that. Yeah, that's my choice.
I think that's a good reason to keep it.
Yeah.
I went back and forth between, well, all of them really. I think the one that I'm going to keep though is woody, because I don't actually think I could exist without sandalwood and sandalwood forward perfumes. I just love it so much. I did think about citrus because it is so happy, but I find there's the satisfaction I get from citrus tends to be shorter lived and more almost like superficial, whereas the satisfaction I get from sandalwood is like this kind of spiritual satisfaction almost. So I think I'll keep woody. So now Adam's question of which of the 5 fragrances you brought today do you keep, and you've got to get rid of all the others. Like, disclaimer, we're not going to make you get rid of them really, but just in a kind of,
well, should we
I could just imagine people like kind of being like, no, don't get rid of them.
just a quick pan over to the trash can filled with glass,
See what you made me do,
right? Well, so maybe a good way to answer that is to briefly run through our picks again, so I can hold mine up. Just Noir, Dior, Amber Kiso, Dias and Durga, Geranium pour Monsieur from Friedrich Malle, Orange Sanguine from Atelier Cologne, and Aqua de Sale from Perfumum Roma. Now, I think the one I would get rid of, the one I would keep and get rid of the rest. Oh boy, it's really just sort of between these two, isn't it? Because on one hand, positive sense memory and happy associations, and on the other hand, something very sultry and very always interesting, no matter how many times I wear it. Something I never get sick of the smell of. I still think I'm probably going to lean towards like the happy, makes me actively feel better, like any good fragrance should, and that's probably Aqua di Sale. So that's the one I think I would keep. How about you two?
Yeah. Go on, John.
Well, okay, so of my choices, I had the Eau d'Orange Vert by Hermes, Tango by Masque Milano. This is my Tom Ford Fougère Platine, which is a decant from my friend. This is Cooper Square by Bond Number 9, and Mega Mare by Orto Parisi. These are all so utterly different from each other, so it's kind of hard to do this kind of an apples and oranges type of choice. But I would say, I mean, as of right now, I mean, the first things that are really kind of yelling out to me, I mean, I'm probably going to, again, I'm going to default. I love all of these fragrances for different reasons, but I'm going to default to my Eau d'Orange Vert because this is, I mean, this is now the third bottle I've owned in my life, and that says a lot right there. So I obviously keep replacing it, so that means something. It's been a pretty consistent thing for me and brings me a lot of joy. So I think I would have to keep this, although I would feel very sorry to say goodbye to those other ones. So
yeah, of course, yeah.
of course. and you, Nicola.
So I brought La Mat by Mendita Rosa, which I've got a little decant of. Run of the River by Parte, which I only have a sample of at the moment, which I will add at some point. Still Life in Rio by Olfactive Studio. Zadig and Voltaire's This Is Her, and Liqueur by Angela Champagne. My keep is Liqueur, just because of the calmingness of it and the sense of tranquility that it just immediately brings. It's just so lovely. So yeah, this one's my keeper. Yeah, beautiful fragrance.
Nice.
So we're not done, but we're done for this episode, right? We've gone through 5, and we've given some folks a lot to think about in terms of what they see as the importance or the perceived importance of qualifying fragrances under certain genres. We see how these genres, what they mean to us individually, and what they do typically, how they behave in perfume. So this is a really fun conversation, and it's not yet completed because, and at the risk of sounding like an old-timey radio announcer, on the next episode of the next round is another set of 5. It's green fragrances, which will, I'm sure, be a whole conversation unto itself. Fruity perfumes, floral perfumes, leathers, and gourmands. And I'm sure each of us are once again going to bring wildly different selections to that conversation. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. That'll be great.
Yeah, me too. And then for Kouquet, I've been noting down things as we went along. So we've got soapy, powdery, soliflora, solinote, milky, musky, poolside suntan, and then smoky and modern.
Smoky is a good get there. Very good get there. That's a clever one. I think that's going to be another kind of intense conversation in and of itself. So thank you for noting those.
Yeah, thank you. I'm particularly also interested in the sort of poolside suntan lotion. God, there's some great options there. It's a favorite category of mine. Yeah.
So don't touch that proverbial dial. We'll be right back with the next installment. No, but thank you so much, guys. It's always so fun to talk to you both about these things, and I hope we've been entertaining at the very least.
Yeah, it's wonderful to talk to you both as well.
Yeah, thank you.